Greatest of all time. That's the theme that we've been in over the month of November. And the theme is built out of a moment from the life of Jesus where some people asked Jesus, hey, Jesus, what's the greatest commandment ever? What is the greatest commandment in the law? In other words, hey, Jesus, out of all the laws that we're supposed to follow, out of all the things that we're supposed to keep in mind when it comes to being God's people, what is most important? What is the greatest commandment of all time, if you will? And I just want everyone to be on the same page in terms of what we've already covered, because I'm going to leave stuff out this week. I've said this before, we leave stuff out every week. You don't have enough time in a setting like this to, explain everything about a biblical passage that scholars and theologians and people have studied for thousands of years. We're doing our best, but just so that we're all on the same page, I want to show you the passage just so that you know what we've already covered, okay? Jesus says, or hearing that Jesus had silenced the Sadducees and the Pharisees got together. One of them, an expert in the law, tested him with the question, teacher, which is the greatest commandment? Which is the greatest commandment in the law? And Jesus replied, love the Lord your God. Love the Lord your God. If you were here 2 weeks ago, Evan talked about that word love, what it even means and why it's important. Why does Jesus answer with love? Okay, so Evan talked about that week 1. And then Jesus goes on, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. If you were here last week, Raylene talked about what it actually means and looks like to love God with your heart, your soul, and your mind. I'm gonna keep reading. This is the first and greatest commandment, 39. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these 2 commandments. I underline the phrase as yourself right there because I want you to notice as we kind of start this morning that for Jesus, loving God and loving people is somehow connected to how we love ourselves. And that's the idea that I kind of want us to think about this morning. What does it actually mean for us who are Christians? What does it mean to love ourselves? Culturally, in North America, we have certain ideas about what it means to love ourselves. I asked, we'll go back to the question really fast. I asked ChatGPT what it means to love myself. It said a couple things like practice self-acceptance, prioritize your well-being, use positive self-talk. These are all good ideas in my opinion, but oftentimes there is an underlying cultural assumption when we talk about loving ourselves. When we talk about, hey, you gotta do what's good for you. You gotta do what's gonna make you healthy. You gotta do what's gonna make you happy. Oftentimes, the underlying cultural narrative is that loving myself is doing whatever it takes to make myself happy. As long as it doesn't hurt anyone else, it's very natural to logically go, okay, I love myself by doing for myself what is gonna make myself happy. If I want Chick-fil-A, I love myself by getting Chick-fil-A. If I don't want to go to school, I love myself by not going to school. If I want a relationship, I love myself by finding someone who I can be in a relationship with. If I want to feel happy, if I want to feel peace, if I don't want to struggle or feel any of the pain in my life, I love myself by doing whatever it takes to be happy and to feel calm, even if that includes unhealthy coping mechanisms. The paradigm that most people in our society live from is that loving myself is doing whatever it takes to make myself happy. And this is where Christianity can get kind of frustrating for those of us who are growing up in church or who are growing up in a Christian home. Because you all have friends who live with this mindset, and I'm not mad at them by any means. If they want something, they go get it. If they want to do something, they do it. If they want to live a certain way, they live that way. But then for those of you who are growing up here, you show up to church sometimes, and I don't know if you ever noticed this, we have a lot of don'ts. We have a lot of rules. We have a lot of do this and don't do that. I think if you sat down with your Bible and you just made a list of all the times the Bible tells you that you should do something or you shouldn't do something, you would come up with a really long list. I made one just as an example really quickly. I'll show it to you. This is my list of things that we need to do and we don't or we shouldn't do. Believe in God and follow Jesus. Don't lie, don't steal, don't give in to temptation. Develop spiritual practices. Don't live under the influence of drugs. Don't sin. Care for the poor and the marginalized. Don't be greedy. Don't lust. Practice gratitude. Don't gossip. Be a part of a church. Honor your parents. Practice generosity. Tell other people about Jesus, work hard, don't be lazy, confess your sins. I can honestly go on, but I'm running out of screen space, as you can see. I actually saw one writer who they concluded that there are over 1,000 instructions. There are over 1,000 imperatives for Christians in our New Testament. And if you compare that list to the cultural narrative that says, if you want to love yourself, just do whatever makes you happy. I think we can actually put that right there, just so that you can literally see what it looks like. That's our list. And then, do we have the next slide? Yeah. Cultural narrative, love yourself, do what makes you happy. Sometimes Christianity can kind of feel like there are 1,000 things that I'm supposed to do, 10,000 things I'm not supposed to do, when the rest of the world just gets to do whatever they want. Add into the mix that some of us in the room still feel like we've never actually had an experience with God. We've never encountered him, maybe the way our parents talk about it or the way other Christians talk about it. And we're left in this place where it's like, okay, I've never felt anything. I've never seen anything. I've never heard anything. And yet I'm supposed to do all these things. And the question that I want us to consider this morning is, why is that our list? Why all the rules? Why are there so many things for us to do and so many things that we should not do? And just to be clear, by the way, that list isn't even exhaustive. You can read your Bible and you can find a lot more things that we ought to do and things that we shouldn't do. That's just the list that I wrote down. And then you compare that with the passage that we're studying this morning, where somebody goes, hey, Jesus, what's the most important commandment? Like, there are a lot of rules. What's most important? And Jesus boils it down to love God, love people the way you love yourself. Love God, love people the way you love yourself. Okay, well then why are there still so many other rules? And I want to try to answer that question by looking at a story from a different moment in the life of Jesus. And the quick background information that I'll give you before we look at the story is, you just have to understand that in first century Israel, Jesus, along with all the other Jews in the region, they had a command from God where one day a week they did not do any work. One day a week, they were very intentional about not doing any work. You couldn't work on the farm. You couldn't try to grow your business. One day a week, they just set it aside for rest and for worship. It was called observing the Sabbath. And I want to show you a story that takes place on one Sabbath day from Mark chapter 2. One Sabbath day, Jesus was walking through a field of ripe grain. As his disciples made a path, they pulled off heads of grain. The Pharisees told on them to Jesus, look, your disciples are breaking Sabbath rules. And Jesus said, really? Haven't you ever read what David did when he was hungry along with those who were with him? How he entered the sanctuary and ate fresh bread off the altar with the chief priest Abiathar right there watching. They ate holy bread that no one but priests were allowed to eat, and he handed it out to his companions. Then Jesus said, and this is the statement that I want us to think about. Then Jesus said, the Sabbath was made to serve us. We weren't made to serve the Sabbath. The Sabbath was made to serve us. We weren't made to serve the Sabbath. This moment from the life of Jesus is really insightful because we actually have Jesus giving clarity about some of the rules in his own religion. And what he says is, people weren't made for the rules. The rules were made for the people. As a matter of fact, if you want, you can go back in time and look at where the Sabbath command even comes from. The Sabbath command comes from God right after he rescues the nation of Israel out of slavery in Egypt. And then it's repeated again right before the people go into the promised land. Deuteronomy chapter 5. Yes, this is Moses talking to the people. Observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy as the Lord your God has commanded you. You have 6 days each week for your ordinary work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath day of rest dedicated to the Lord your God. On that day, no one in your household may do any work. Remember that you were once slaves in Egypt, but the Lord your God brought you out with his strong hand and powerful arm. This is why the Lord your God has commanded you to rest on the Sabbath day. Just think about this. This is God instructing a nation, a group of people, right after he's rescued them from slavery, right after taking them from a place where they were overwhelmed and they were overworked. And God says, I have a command for you. In light of me rescuing you out of that life where you were constantly striving, constantly straining, constantly having to provide for yourself, in light of that, now that you're mine, you need to rest. I've rescued you from that life. And now life with me is a life where you must rest. And then you fast forward from that moment back to our story with Jesus, and they're walking through a field and they're picking heads of grain on a Sabbath. And some people look at Jesus and they're like, Jesus, hey, you're breaking the rule. Don't forget, God said we need to rest. And if you remember, Jesus doesn't say anything bad about the commandment. Jesus doesn't say the commandment is wrong. Jesus isn't anti the commandment. Jesus simply says that humans were not created to follow rules. The rules were created to form humans. The Sabbath was created in part to help people just learn how to rest, how to enjoy the life that God had blessed them with. And this is so insightful because Jesus understood that the rules in our religion, they are not designed to hold you back. They're actually designed to help you grow. The reason our version of love yourself is different from the rest of the world is because we don't look to ourselves to determine what's best for ourselves. We actually look to our Creator and the person who rescued us to determine what's best for ourselves. So for example, if we throw the list back on the screen, I already read it, I'm not gonna read it again, but just so you can get an idea of some of the rules that we have, I want you to consider these instructions, okay? These are all maybe things that we've grown up thinking we should do or we shouldn't do. I want you to consider these instructions as God teaching us how to love ourselves by God showing us what is actually best for ourselves. Literally, aside from the fact that these things are morally right and that if you follow them, they will have positive influences on your relationship, like I'm placing that to the side for just a moment. I just want you to consider these things as God telling us how to love ourselves by God showing us what's best for ourselves. So for example, you consider lying, right? Lying is on the list. Many of us have been told don't lie. Aside from the fact that it's morally wrong and relationally damaging, when you live a life full of lies, you actually become someone, if you've ever experienced this, who is really stressed and really anxious about being found out. When you build your whole personality on bragging about things that you've never done, when you conceal the truth just so that you look better to other people or so that you stay out of trouble, when you live a life full of lies, you don't become the best version of yourself. You just become someone who's trying to cover up the worst version of themselves. So when God says don't lie, not only is it gonna help your relationships, not only is it morally good, but when God says don't lie, he's actually thinking about how you can become the most authentic version of yourself. Consider the commands to avoid greed and to practice generosity. These are things that, again, if you grow up in a church context, you're gonna hear them at some point. There's actually so much research to support the idea that being generous has positive benefits to your own health and well-being. I'll give you one example from a financial organization called The Ascent. Their research concluded, I'm just gonna read this, it's not gonna be on the screen. Generous people reported higher levels of life satisfaction and happiness compared to non-generous people. We call it stingy. Generous people reported higher scores on the closeness of their relationships. They reported being happier at work. The research also found a correlation between being generous and your mental and physical health. Translation, generous people tend to be happier. And here's the point that I'm trying to make with showing you these and using these examples. We are instructed to be generous. And we say things, sometimes you come to church and we're like, hey, be generous, share your money, share your time. Don't just use everything you have for yourself. We are instructed to be generous, not just because it makes God happy, but because it actually makes you healthy. We are instructed, don't lie, not just because God is in heaven, getting upset when you lie, how could you? We're instructed not to lie because God actually cares about you becoming the most authentic version of yourself. You becoming the person he actually created you to be. The rules in our religion, they're not meant to just control us. They're actually meant to guide us into becoming the people that God has created us to be. And there are some things on that list that you're naturally gonna agree with because of your upbringing, because this is just what I've always done. This is what I feel is right. There's some things when you follow Jesus that you're naturally going to agree with. Jesus and the New Testament, it has parts of it that everybody likes, whether it is loving marginalized people, whether it is a high moral compass, whatever it is. There are things about following Jesus that everybody just kind of naturally likes. But when you really commit and when you really try to say, Jesus, you are the Lord of my life, there is inevitably going to be times where you don't want to do things, where you don't want to confess your sin, where you don't want to stop that bad habit, where you don't want to let go of something that you know isn't actually any good for you. There's going to be times like that. And the temptation that we're all going to face is to believe the lie that loving myself is living my life like I know what's best. We will each face this temptation in different ways, but we're all gonna be tempted at times because of different desires that we have, because of different seasons and circumstances that we find ourselves in. We're all gonna be tempted at times to set aside Jesus's way of life, to take the list of do's and don'ts and to go, okay, well, I'll take this one, but not that one, and I'll just kind of do it my own way. We're all gonna be tempted because we are convinced that we know better. Because we are convinced that loving myself is doing whatever it takes to make myself happy. But the truth is that loving yourself is actually living your life like God knows what's best. When it comes to how you see yourself and how you treat other people, when it comes to how you value yourself and what you think you're here for, you actually love yourself best when you let God determine what's best for you. Which is why Jesus can sum up all the rules, take that list that I made, and then add dozens and dozens and hundreds of imperatives and instructions and guidelines and recommendations throughout our scriptures. Jesus can take all of that and he can sum it up like this. Matthew chapter 22. Jesus replied, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the rules, all the other do's and don'ts of our faith are actually meant to help us become people of love, people who love God, people who love others, and people who love ourselves. That's why this commandment is the greatest, because it's the one that all the others point to, and it's the one that all the others actually help us accomplish. You know, we'll just leave that verse on the screen really fast. So it was my birthday, right? We just did the confetti cannon. And then my son, many of you know Raylan and I just had our first, well, we didn't just have our first kid. We had our first kid a year ago. He just turned 1 like 2 weeks ago. And yeah, woo! And, you know, thanks, uncle. He just turned 1, and it's I just tell you, like, as a dad, the more mobile he becomes, the more fun he becomes. Because like in the first couple months where he just sits there and looks like a little alien and just doesn't do anything, that's not as fun personally, in my opinion, in my subjective opinion as a dad. That one isn't as fun as now he's like walking around and he looks like he's drunk every time he's walking because he just, you know, he's not stable and whatever. But one of the fun things is or not fun things, one of the challenging things is that as he becomes more mobile, he constantly wants to touch and get near things that are extremely dangerous for him. Like in terms of as he's been walking, him having to learn how to, what he can lean on, what is actually going to hold up his weight, what can actually support him. It's like a real thing that babies just love electrical sockets. That for whatever reason, I don't know if you know the stereotype, but genuinely sees an electrical socket and is like, how can I get my hand to, you know, just to do something dangerous. And as he is exploring the house and his surroundings and constantly just, you know, wanting to touch things under the sink that are actually poisonous, it's been such a journey of him wanting to do things that I have to constantly say no to. Not because I want him to have a bad day, not because I don't want him to have a good time, but because I know, because of where I'm at in life, I know that is actually extremely dangerous for him. He has no concept of that. As a matter of fact, sometimes I seem like a total buzzkill because he opens up a cabinet under the sink that he's never allowed to get into, and all he just sees is colorful bottles with a bunch of stuff, and all he wants to do is just go crazy. He just wants to enjoy what he's just found. And then here I come, total buzzkill. No, you can't. Picks him up, takes him away from the cabinet. From his perspective, you would think that I am extremely restricting and that I don't want him to have fun. From my perspective, I just don't want him to get hurt. And I actually want him to grow up to become someone who knows how to handle himself in all those environments. So yeah, right now there are certain rules. Not because I get a kick out of saying no, but because I actually want to see him grow. And if you'll follow the illustration, for those of us who are Jesus followers, I mean, you're all in a season of life where you are literally growing out of the rules of your household. Like, depending on where you're at in your grade, you are on your way to no longer needing to follow household rules. Once you move out, you can get rid of whatever you want to get rid of. And it's extremely tempting and it's extremely appealing to look at your life, maybe to look at your faith, and to go, the moment I don't need these things anymore, I'm not going to do them. The moment I can't, some of you are actually already doing it. And I'm just pointing it out. You look at the list and you go, yeah, I don't want that. That's restricting. That's not what I want. That's not what's going to make me happy. That doesn't feel like loving myself. And can I just submit the idea that maybe loving yourself isn't doing whatever you want in the moment to make yourself happy, but maybe loving yourself is seeing yourself and treating yourself in a way that's actually going to set yourself up for success. That rather than living a life where it's just, what do I want? How am I going to get it? What if we were actually people who believed, what does God want from me? And how is he trying to give it to me? All of the rules are ultimately coming back to helping us become people who love God, love others, and love ourselves. So here's what I think you should do with this. Here's what I think you should do this week. As you make time to read your Bible, the next time you see a command in the scriptures, I want you to ask yourself this question. How does this command help me love God, love others, and love myself? When you read challenging commands and instructions, when you struggle with obeying things that are in the Bible, maybe some of you already have issues with faith. You already have issues with Christianity. There are things about our faith, our belief system that seem difficult to accept or embrace. When you come up against things in the faith that seem challenging, that seem restricting, my invitation to you is to at least consider the question, how does this command help me love God, others, and myself?